Well, hi everybody. This is a special episode of Anecdotal Evidence. Um, it would be 11 if I had published the 10, but the one I did for 10 was very emotional, and it's sort of untimely and out of date, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that and call this episode 10. The fact that there's not that many people that are actually going to watch this maybe decide to go ahead and make it public, even though some of the information some of you may not understand unless you're a close friend of mine or my family, because it has to do with Jeshua. But without getting into that too much, I guess I'll just tell the story. It's been 3 days now since I had this experience. But 3 days ago, I was in the middle of the day. I was feeling tired. So I decided to take a nap. And I took a nap and I went into a deep sleep. And I went into a very lucid dream. And in this dream, basically, in order to make it understandable, let's just say that in the dream, I woke up, or I was conscious in another timeline, a different timeline than this one, much different. But the people in my life, particularly my family and everything, were in this timeline. And what occurred was I was basically at a job with my coworkers. I can't describe what it was. Like I said, it was a different timeline. And I was bragging about something that was happening with my youngest son, Jeshua. There was a space mission, a moon launch, a spaceship, rocket, whatever you want to call it, shuttle, that was being launched on its way to a lunar mission. And this would have been October 5th, 2025, in another timeline. And so this mission that was going to the moon, my son, Adam Jeshua, was aboard that spacecraft. And I was bragging to my coworkers about how my son was going to the moon. And I was feeling quite excited about it. And it was very real. And as I was realizing that my son was going to the moon, somewhere in that realization, I realized that it was a dream, and I woke up. Now, that in itself doesn't tell you a whole lot. And since it's been a few days, I'm not as clear on the details as I was. But there are several factors to put into this statement that I'm telling you. I think probably the one that sticks out in my mind is something that Jeshua told me probably about a year or so before he passed, where he was describing a journey that he had taken while he was partaking in ayahuasca. And the way he described it was that he woke up on a spaceship. And he realized that he had just woken up out of a dream or a simulation in which this world was that dream, and this timeline was that dream. And that he made a note of the fact that when he woke up in spaceship, he had the sense that that was the real reality, and that his dreaming of this timeline and this reality was the simulation that he was in while he was in transit on the spaceship. Now, neither he nor I thought or imagined, although he did mention that he seemed like he was on a shuttle or something like that. So, and that was several years ago that he told that to me. And there are other aspects that I've talked about having to do with things that Joshua told me and some of my own dreams that I had before he died that all fall into this category or this perspective of timelines. And what I realized when I woke up was that what I experienced in that dream, not only was it very real and lucid, but I could not help feeling, and I felt this way for a couple of days, that dream or that experience was in fact my visiting another timeline, which was different from this, much different from this in terms of personal stuff, but almost identical in every other way. Civilization, our nations, basically the shape of the world was very similar, but it was definitely different on a personal level. My obviously the most difference was the fact that in that timeline, not only was Joshua still alive, but he was involved in some epic adventures having to do with going on a moon landing. Now, it's like we haven't gone to the moon in decades. In fact, there are many, many young people who believe that we never actually went there in the first place, which, I've tried to explain to them that, I watched it happen on television in 1969 or 68, 69. I'm getting old. I get my dates mixed up, and I could research it. You can do it if you want. 68, 69. I think it was 69 that we landed on the moon. And I watched the event on live television, and it's including the launch of the rockets and the communication, the radio communication in space between Houston and Apollo, the live communication, and describing what was going on their journey to the moon, and as they arrived at the moon and landed at the moon. And then once they got on the moon, they had cameras which they deployed. Now it's like, the one of the things that makes the conspiracy theorists think that it was a conspiracy is the fact that the first shot we get of the moon landing is Armstrong stepping off the landing module, and making his famous statement about one small step for man, etc. And at the time, some of us might have wondered, but we didn't put a lot of stock into it, was the fact that there was a camera outside taking a picture of his first steps. So obviously they went outside first, put the camera down, and then staged that famous line of one step for man. And the experience for anyone who was alive at that time and adult enough to pay attention, there was no question whatsoever about whether it was a simulation. And the idea that Stanley Kubrick could have produced a video through Hollywood techniques to fake the moon landing is maybe slightly a possibility, because Stanley Kubrick was ahead of his time in terms of special effects and lighting and everything, and camera action, and he created some really good movies based on that. So the trying to call it that is, well, if you weren't there, you really don't know, and I don't want to dwell on that too much. But the point was, is we hadn't gone to in this timeline, we haven't gone to the moon in decades. But apparently, in this timeline, it was the space program was completely different and more active. I don't know whether we had somebody like Elon Musk in that timeline or not, but my son Jesh was on his way to the moon. In that timeline right now, he's on the moon. My son Jesh is on the moon. And I was very proud about it. And I woke up realizing that that timeline was actually more real than this one. So I guess the point here is that at this point in my life experience and my esoteric explorations, my mystical understanding, and my spiritual convictions, I am absolutely convinced, for all kinds of different factors, not the least of which is my own experience, but other records as well, going back centuries, that refer to and give examples of this construct, timeline, or simulation, or this reality as being a simulation, or in some of the ancient texts, like the Gnostic texts, a copy of the original, which absolutely coincides with what I experienced in this idea of alternate timelines. Now, there are other factors involved here that have to do with the consciousness awakening that is occurring on a larger scale than ever. Unfortunately, I believe it's not nearly as large as the hype that's being presented on the internet. I mean, if you were to look at the internet and look at the topics about all this, you would think there was a lot of people that are actually aware. But of course, if you went to some of those YouTube channels and looked at what the people had to say in the chats, you might come to the same conclusion I have, which is that there is an incredible amount of participatory NPCs, meaning there's a lot of people that are participating in the internet, YouTube channels, and everything else, which are actually just non-player characters that all they do is regurgitate the same information. They agree. They don't have any original thought. They apparently can't think for themselves. They need some sort of YouTube leader to tell them what to think, and obviously the algorithms in the search bar gives them just what they want, so they can get the kind of information that they want to talk about, which is all very shallow and, like I said, non-original, non-innovative, definitely not critical thinking. And so that most of what's being represented on the internet by these so-called people who claim to have these various knowledges, which have been hidden and obscured from the common knowledge for many, many thousands of years, and all of a sudden with the internet, they're like out there, and everybody's talking about timelines and paradigm shifts and consciousness awakening, and all these things are true and happening. But it's apparent to me that even with all of the clickbaiting that's going on with all these people that, you know, are jumping on the bandwagon. Yeah, I get it. I'm there. I'm conscious. I'm awakening. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Well, unfortunately, that is not really true, because the actual consciousness that's awakening on this planet is not being displayed in public view on the internet, on podcasts and other YouTube channels. If there's any truth in those YouTube channels, you got to really get in there with discernment and find it. And it's there. This is true, because of what they're talking about is the truth. They're just not talking about it truthfully. They're talking about it with their own motivations, which are very, simple, human, greedy reasons. The people are talking about it because they want to get noticed, because they want hits, and they want hits because if they get enough hits, they're going to get paid. And of course, that's really the motivation for every NPC on this planet, is to get paid. And the more they get paid, the more they consider themselves a success and therefore more real, when actually they're still just NPCs with no consciousness whatsoever. And it's been very hard for me to accept that concept, because I want to give all human beings the benefit of the doubt. And I will say that every human being has a potential to be real, but they spend their time in very finite, shallow loops of repetitive thought and action, and very little originality. They depend on others to supply original thought, and then it becomes just a copy, which is the nature of this reality, a copy. So back to the idea of the timeline. We are coming to the end of a long process where sometime in the near future, part of our consciousness awakening is going to be a re-merging with the original timeline. We are going to break out or transfer or transmute from this false copy of reality into the real one. And there's many religious and spiritual concepts refer to that in different ways. The real timeline, or the real reality, as in another story that Jesh told me about a similar journey where he took ayahuasca and he went into a greater reality, which he said was, his words were describing it as more solid than this one. And he compared it to the fact that science and everything else basically states that we are all fields of energies with particles suspended in it, and that in theory, based on their analysis of the substance of this reality, the space between our molecules and atoms is so wide that we, in theory, should be able to literally walk through each other and walls and everything else, because we're mostly just space. And yet the reality that Jeshua was talking about, he said, was absolutely solid, 100%, and compared to this one. So in all of this metamorphosis that's going on, this paradigm shifting, this consciousness change and everything else, the idea of another timeline is not only valid, but it's most likely true. And I guess the important thing that I've already talked about this with my friends and family, about the not necessarily the timeline itself, but the timeline of events and eventuality, meaning that we are on a path that's leading to certain inevitabilities, and some of those inevitabilities are not very likely going to be pleasant. And of course, a lot of what's going on in the world right now qualifies as that. And this is part of the transitioning. Some people call it birthing pains. The important thing is we have very little time to adjust our way of thinking, our belief systems, and in order to mitigate the damage that's going to occur if we don't. The worst case scenario is kind of a World War III type thing. The best case scenario at this point is to be able to survive what parts of the negative actually are going to come. And those parts are going to be here because this reality is governed by the collective systems of belief. And when the entire world subconsciously believes in aspects of reality, which we might call physics, as being the constricts and the limitations of this reality, like gravity, for example, and entropy, and even death, that those are undeniable facts of this reality. And but those, that is all connected to our subconscious collective belief in what this reality is. And we have very little time to do something about that. And some people are understanding that, and it's happening, and that's good. It's a great sign. For me, after living through most of my life being ignored, ridiculed, and not listened to because I was talking about this stuff 50 years ago when I first became aware of it. And when I became aware of it, I felt it quite important to communicate, and I couldn't really communicate it to hardly anyone, just a few people. And most of those people, unfortunately, are now dead. So I don't have any witnesses left. But that doesn't change the truth. And the truth is that we only have a matter of years. I mean, the two important dates here are 2030 and 2040, and you may have heard other people talking about that on the internet with these various fly-by-night esoteric, oh, we got the truth websites. Those two dates, 2030 and 2040, represent pivotal points in our turning points in our current timeline. 2030 represents a point where the end of opportunity to achieve any higher levels of consciousness during this phase of changes and paradigm shifting is going to come to an end, and then we are going to enter into what might be referred to biblically as the tribulation, where it just gets really rough. And I would say that if you live in the city after 2030, you're probably going to die. I'd say that's a high likelihood, considering because of how far it could break down, possibly. I mean, if we lose the grid and the power grid, then we lose everything. We lose transportation, we lose supply, access to food, particularly in the cities. And, within a matter of weeks, all the cities are going to be like Zombieville. People will just, if they survive that long, they'll be like fighting each other and killing each other over resources. Many, many sci-fi movies have gone into great detail to demonstrate what that might be like. I mean, there's people in the world right now that are experiencing it already. And between now and 2030, we have an opportunity. And that opportunity is within ourselves to adjust our consciousness, our ways of thinking, our ways of looking at stuff, the ways in which we make decisions. Now, the core basis of the proper way to deal with this has already been given to us. We understand it. It's been we may not understand it, but we know it. Everybody has been given the lesson of love. Whether they learned it good enough to deal with what's going on or not remains to be seen. And there's various different levels of stuff. I mean, it's like some people have been on the process of waking up for many, many, many decades. And inversely, just some people are just now starting to wake up. And that's not really having to do with age or generation. It has to do with timing. It has to do with now, because now is when it's happening. I remember thinking and and imagining what the Aquarian Age was going to be like back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And though I got a few glimpses and pictures, which I recognize and identify now as actually having occurred within the past 20 years. But in the 70s and 80s and 90s, it was like looking through a glass darkly, or knowing the sunrise was going to come, but having no idea when. And being in the darkness, expecting the light to come, but not knowing when it was going to get here. To the point where around the turn of the century, I personally almost gave up on my beliefs that it was going to happen at all in my lifetime. But I now know differently. I was already told this many years ago when I was a young man, and it became more understandable and out front in my consciousness as we move through the 21st century here and go through all these changes. So the important thing to understand is that we need to make these changes with ourselves. And as we make them, we need to bring those changes together into community. And that community is not social media. It's not YouTube. It's not the internet at all. I mean, the internet is a tool. We can use it. I'm using it right now, even though it's laughable that anything other than just a few people are going to get the message and use it properly, because most people, including people in my family, will reject the message simply because I'm the one that's delivering it, which is nothing new. I mean, people get all hung up on the messenger so much without even ever paying attention to the message that, there's nothing new there. But that doesn't stop me feeling like I have to deliver the message. And I feel like if I delivered the message, if nobody reads it or accesses it, well, that's not my fault. I did my job the best I could to relay the message, which is one of the reasons why I'm here. It's one of the reasons why my soul and spirit incarnated in this time, and also produce people, hopefully, in my own family and my friends, that would get on the frequency and wavelength and assist in the process of the true awakening and the consciousness awakening that's needed in order to get through the Great Tribulation, which is only 5 years away, more or less. There's no exactitude here, but 2030 and 2040 are about as exact as I've ever dared to get. By 2030, all our options are off the table. We got what we got, and we got to run with it. But we got this much time to change our act as best as possible. First with the individual, and then most importantly, we have to slow down, diminish our dependency on the technology, particularly cell phones and internet, as a means to socially interact. We have to get back to the normal ways of doing things. We have to get back to the normal organic face-to-face association, going, visiting people, congregating in purposefully, like what a real spiritual congregation should be about, where we gather together with what we have and we share it and help each other grow. And we got 5 years to do that. And we have been pushed away from it by all this technology and the devices to an almost insidious degree of evil, how far it is taken us, and how so many people, whether they realize it or not, they literally believe in this as being the basis and the structure of reality. Think of science and technology as a natural progress of intellectual or spiritual or consciousness evolution, when that cannot be any further from the truth. The measure of reality is not the definition of reality. If you can weigh something, measure it, and classify it, that classification and the weight and the measure is not reality. It's just a perspective. So the real tools that we need to measure and implement progress and evolution are inside of us, not outside of us in a book or an archive or a system of thinking that is finite and has limitations, like science. Science states that gravity is an absolute state, for example. And there are many, besides myself, who know that gravity, as an example, is not an absolute state. And that there are examples of it which, ignorant people want to treat as imaginative, wishful thinking, whatever you want to call it, simply because they do not have what it takes to achieve the understanding and the faith and the belief to know that gravity, for example, is not an absolute state. Now, there are many other factors like that. So the ultimate thing that we have to do is we have to uphold, bring to the surface, bring to the front our intuitive understandings of reality, and get away from the definitive understandings of science, civilization, and what's considered to be reality. And we have 5 years to do it. Now, I would love to talk about this and in any format, whatever, obviously eye to eye. My original concept of having discussion online has proven to be a waste of my expectations, because the NPCs have taken over. It's all a totally controlled game at this point, and I don't want to play it. I'm using the tool because it's convenient for me to do so, and I appreciate the tools, but I don't worship them, regardless of what you may think. I like to use them. I like to be entertained as much as anyone else. I like watching movies, TV shows, whatever, listening to music, which brings me to my next point. Okay, so now that I finally got my recording to work again, this is a wrap up, a finalization of episode 10. So I had eyebrow hair that was okay. At any rate, yeah, this is a wrap up of episode 10. And I was going to include in the original episode 10 a little blurb about AI. And since when I first did anecdotal evidence, I promised everybody I would include music with my monologue. So I have some music that's coming up right away, which I have to do a bit of a disclaimer and explanation, and I hope not to have to do it too many times. But I used AI to generate this song, which is following. It's it wasn't just like random production. I had to work with it, and I did a lot of arrangement, and so I spent some time doing it. So it wasn't just like I just piped the words into AI and said make me a song. No, it was a little more complicated than that. But what I wanted to say was about it's sort of related to some of what I was speaking of, and that has to do with being used as a tool. And it also sort of crosses over into entertainment too. So the two of them are acceptable to a certain degree, everything, moderation, everything. But as an artist and a musician and a songwriter, my first thought about AI and making music was I didn't like it. I thought it was kind of like, an affront to my musicianship. However, I'm not only a musician, I'm also a poet, which another aspect of being a poet is a lyricist. But what I discovered when I took poems that I have written in the past 10, 20 years, that the difference between the way in which I write poetry and the way I write lyrics has determined a lot of way of how my songs are structured and everything else. And so when I got the AI to make versions of my my poetry and interpret my poetry into music, and eventually I learned how to actually tell it what key to play in and stuff like that, so it wasn't like, total random generation. But the results they're amazing. And I realized that me using AI to make music, to generate music, was no different than taking my poem into a recording studio and paying the studio and the musicians to write and compose the song. I mean, the studios and musicians used to do that. And you could, with a certain amount of money, you could just bring the lyrics into a song, and they would write the song for you, and it would be your song, and et cetera, et cetera. But it would take, at the very least, days, if not weeks or longer, right, for a studio group of musicians to actually be able to accomplish that task. And it would cost you many thousands of dollars, and that would be just for one song. So in comparison, I can accomplish the same thing by paying a subscription for about $10 a month, and I could get more features if I wanted to, but it's sufficient for my needs at $10 a month, so I can go in there and make a numerous amount of songs for $10 a month, and it's all professional standards of what you might call production, or at least close. And I mean, there's lots of tweaks, and it's still AI, and there's digital quirkinesses here and there, but overall, it's a really nice tool, I think, for poets, musicians, artists. It's a really nice tool. So without more explanation, I will end this episode of Anecdotal Evidence, and you will see the example of my AI music coming right up.
Here I still remain, in the respect of true remembrance that is still active in my brain. For the reason of truth, I continue on. For the feeling in my heart, the love is never gone. the nature of creation. I still say what I must, revealing what is in the shadows, under the error and spiritual rust. For the knowledge of what is here and coming, I stand and take your abuse. For you cannot knock me off the rock, no matter what lies you choose. I remain a thorn in your fallen God's side, and you too will fall because of your pride. When it comes time for me to leave, I hope you are able to receive what I have carried in sacred trust, the knowledge of what is true and just. I no longer care about your acknowledgement, because your consciousness is empty and you cannot implement what you do not have. In nothingness you have plenty. You cannot remove me without my God's approval. Even with a bullet you have no say over my removal. I used to want to have compassion for your ignorance and brutality, but here I stand in the armor of God, secure in truth's totality. So I have no tears for your self-made destruction. I won't go down into your abyss, though I still stand with one foot in your hell. The other is firmly planted in heavenly eternal bliss. In heavenly eternal bliss. What you gonna do about me? What you gonna do